comparison. Jo is in the field and her network is a bit unstable today. So we might see her, hopefully. Dr. Joanna Carlos Becerra, who is in the Community Engagement Office at Rhodes University. Hi, Jo. Cool stuff, folks. All right, as I say, we'll start promptly at 1500 hours, and then we'll take the show from there. Yeah. And colleagues, I would like to draw our attention to the fact that we are still waiting on some of the panelists. Should they not be able to make it because of South Africa's wonderful and reliable infrastructure and ICT connectivity, what we'll basically just do is that we'll continue with the program and keep it running such that we do not waste time. And that would allow us, of course, a bit of some time, possibly even to slip in some questions if folk have questions from the floor. Yeah, so, and on that, colleagues, I think it might be for us to go. If the team are happy, I'm happy to start with today's proceedings. I see that my network is a bit unstable. Once again, as I say, welcome to South Africa for those who are joining from outside. I might cut in and out, but hopefully for the majority of it, it will stay stable. As I said earlier, my name is Sisegwa Khumalo, a lecturer of philosophy in the Department of Philosophy at the University of Fort Hare, and a PhD candidate at the University of Pretoria, reading in political philosophy. And I have had the distinguished honor this afternoon of welcoming everybody and facilitating this amazing conversation that we will have around the book. And I just have sort of a preliminary discussion that I want to frame today's conversation around in relation to the book, situating the book, of course, in a long-standing tradition in terms of the intellectual debates that we have seen with respect to some of the topical components that the book covers. And so if folks will forgive me, I'm going to be reading from what I've prepared as a couple of notes as a way of sort of getting the ball rolling. So I come to the reading of this book and my response to it, having worked in decolonial theory for a number of years now. The reason behind my working in this area was first inspired by the naivete of a student who had diagnosed that there was a disjuncture in the promise of the university and what we as students were experiencing in our lecture theatres within the institution. What Paphitis, Becerra, and Patterson termed the positivistic stance toward knowledge production. Theirs is concerned with the underlying assumption behind positivism, which suggests that an objective methodology will give researchers access to the single absolute truth describing things as they really are. The challenge, which is noted even by the editors themselves, is that such a position has never come to pass, even with the countless phenomenological studies and theoretical propositions that the reader will find in areas such as phenomenology, for instance, in philosophy, as for one example. There is, however, a complication that I would like us all to consider today as we dive into this conversation. In the postmodernist world, where subject positionality plays a crucial role in the ways in which we understand the world, there is a concern with respect to what we can understand as being a valid knowledge claim. So how do we actually understand a knowledge claim to be a knowledge claim in relation to this kind of subject positionality or subjective positionality that we're kind of being thrust to take up in the knowledge production process. The processes that are rightly taken to task in the knowledge production process itself by the book are what have historically given us knowledge as that which informs the ways in which we order our worlds. The blind peer review system, the ecology of knowledge with all its faults, in the journal editors and academic presses who each wield power, either in service of or against certain groups within society, is what has structured the world as we know it. The answer to this question that I pose here today is found in the methods that are proposed in the book, which is to say, in the subject positionality that needs to be given sort of credibility in terms of how we read and understand people's understanding of the world, how do we understand a valid knowledge claim? So that particular question is taken up by the book. The editors and contributors come to this question with a framing of the function of higher education, which answers one of the longest standing questions in the area of philosophy of education since the time of thinkers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau in Emile or on education, William Wellington Gopa in his composition Ingxoxo enkulu ngemfundo, and Ali A. Mazrui when he thinks through political values and the educated class in Africa. Simply, the volume makes a timely contribution that seeks to overturn the methodological approaches that we have worked with since the inception of the modern university that, as Bill Redding so aptly notes, developed first as the Humboldtian University of Culture, which moved into the Kantian University of Reason, and finally into the Contemporary University of Excellence. In simple terms, the editors and the authors contest the idea of positivistic knowledge by way of demonstrating that the university ought to be in service of those it serves. The orientation we find in the book is one that jettisons the commodity-driven language of science, but has ultimately eroded the public good value of education, specifically scientific development. Their conceptual foregrounding being predicated on the White Paper 3 of 1997 and the aims and ambitions that our founders of our nascent democracy had when they envisioned the function and uses of education demonstrate a new way of thinking about the university, promulgating and recentering the notion of the university working in service of those who are contributing to its lifeblood, the polity. So what the book really does is that it takes seriously a number of constituent contributors to the knowledge-making process, as well as those really who keep the institution, such as the university, running, and that's the polity, of course. We see this most aptly demonstrated in chapter 3 and 4, where the power dynamics that constitute the education space and citizen science are discussed. The book brings the conversation home in more interesting ways by tapping into the epistemic frameworks, knowledge systems, and orientation of the masses in our country. Chapter 5 takes up the question of ontological legitimacy by way of demonstrating the potentialities that can be unlocked in primarily recognizing that the subjects of the subject, that is, of course, the individuals who come to any disciplinary training, that the subjects of the subject bring to the pedagogic process modes of seeing and knowing that are valid and legitimate prior to engaging in the disciplinary formation process of being subjected to the subject. In a way, what the reader encounters in chapter 5 is response to the earlier question I posed of how it is that we can come to determine the accuracy of knowledge systems if every subject positionality is seen as valid. In response to this question, the work of Velimitova, for instance, when she inquires about the process of decolonization without too much relativism, comes to mind. Her contribution seeks to suggest that in the process of treating the question that I have opened with, ours lies in ensuring that the decolonial process is not refuted with the responses that would legitimately otherwise come from a positivist perspective. Here, the methodological assumptions that come with the proposition that we find in the introduction and the aims of the book, we can deduce from the initial chapter of the book. So the methods really in terms of how we actually resolve this problem that I open with, I think we find a response to this, so we can come to sort of articulate a response to that question in chapter 1. Bobo's contribution lends itself to the articulation and development of a method with respect to what is intended by the objective of working from and with community engagement as a core function of the institution. Hers allows the reader who is interested in the objective of linking both the subject with the service orientation of the university to find its purest articulation. And of course, this then bleeds throughout the entire book in terms of demonstrating how this particular process of marrying community engagement, service learning, as well as the notion of an anchor institution becomes a crucial and critical component, specifically if you think about the historical legislation that governs higher education in South Africa. And with those brief words, I would like to now invite one of the co-editors of the book, Dr. Charlie-Ann Paphitis, who is a researcher at King's College and editor of the book and author of the introduction, Chapter 4, a community-based water monitoring program in Makanda, Grahamstown, using the improved hydrogen sulfide test kit, and Chapter 6, legitimate knowledge at the border between learning and perceived learning for students in service learning, to take the stage. Charlie, over to you.
Thank you so much, Khumalo, and thank you for that really insightful introduction and your provocations on the book. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I have a couple of slides that I'd like to share with you. I'm not going to speak for very long, but I would like to share these slides along with what I have to say. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen now and hope that you can all see that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the birth of the idea of this book, and the ideological and theoretical foundations of this book is really the culmination of years of collaborative thinking and working with brilliant colleagues. In particular, I'd like to mention Lindsay Kelland and Pedro Tubensky, who I worked with in pushing the boundaries of engaged teaching, as well as work across a number of distinct but interrelated pioneering engaged research projects with the Alan Gray Center for Leadership Ethics, the CSSR, the pharmacy faculty, the chemistry department, and most importantly, the community engagement division at Rhodes University. The idea in Apartheid of knowledge in higher education was initially expounded by Burnell and Villalpando, who highlighted in 2002 the de facto race and gender-based segregation of knowledge within the modern academy. This form of epistemic injustice still pervades our universities, and in 2016 to 2017, I worked on a project with the AGCLE for the Andrew Mellon Foundation on the demographic diversity of philosophy and the possibilities for transforming philosophy in South Africa, where we really tried to understand and respond to this reality of an apartheid of knowledge in higher education within the South African context. Around the same time, I received an NRF community engagement grant that focused on exploring the theoretical foundations for community engagement in higher education. And through this grant, I set up the Epistemic Justice and Engaged Research Collective, where I was working with Joe and Craig, as well as a plethora of unbelievably talented students, including Khumalo, who we just heard from. And although this was a highly interdisciplinary group, including members from philosophy, education, environmental science, history, pharmacy, biotechnology, and more, we were all united in pushing the boundaries on thinking through how epistemic injustice was being perpetuated by and in higher education institutions, and most importantly, what we could do, specifically the methods we could use to promote epistemic justice in our teaching and research practices at universities. And as this work simultaneously flourished and met with a lot of strong detractors, and really it did, we began to see how the epistemic injustices in teaching and research revealed multiple and intersecting apartheids of knowledges within our higher education institutions. And I first floated the idea of another apartheid of knowledge at a conference on decoloniality run at Rhodes University by the Black Management Forum, which was actually organized by Khumalo, outlining two further apartheids of knowledge. First, a division between knowledge internal to the academy, curated by academic experts, and the knowledge held and generated outside of the ivory tower. And second, a division between what's called academic learning and what's called soft skills learning, such as social awareness, critical citizenship, and personal growth, which is really needed by our students as they leave the university and enter the world, the working world specifically. And the final thread of thinking behind this book was born from the coming together of two further major projects. And the first was the development of the Community Engaged Learning Symposium. In 2015, at the Community Engagement Division, we had this very ambitious dream of establishing an international conference run by the CE Division that would challenge the boundaries of what academic conferences looked like by bringing together academics, practitioners, and community partners to share their work in one space. It was a bold idea and one that challenged the dominant ideological paradigm of legitimacy in academic spaces. And in 2016, we had a special issue of the Journal of New Generation Sciences dedicated to papers from that symposium. But we felt that there weren't enough community partner voices in that collection. And this really laid the foundations for the book project that you were launching today. And this book project has finally allowed us to fulfill this vision. And Joe's going to talk a little bit more about the book as method in a while. So I'll hand over to her to do that. But the second project was also our partnership with the Common Good First project that spurred our thinking around social innovation and drove the theme of this 2018 symposium. And Craig is going to talk a little bit more about how social innovation plays a big role in our thinking behind this book. So that's pretty much all from me in the birth of the idea. I hope that helps to frame the book a little bit, and I'm going to hand over to Joe now.
Thanks, Charlie, and thanks, Khumalo, for the beautiful introduction. I hope you can hear me fine. I'm in the field and it's very windy here. I'm not a philosopher, so the way I present is very different from Khumalo and Charlie. But as Charlie mentioned, I wanted to talk to you about the book as a method. So to get into that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about community engagement. So within community engagement, we have volunteering, and that's what most people associate community engagement with. But we also have engaged research and service learning. And through these three streams of community engagement, what we're really trying to do, as Charlie mentioned, is really break down the barriers of like where knowledge is produced. And also understanding that the foundation of community engagement and its three streams is that one, knowledge is found everywhere, so it's not contained to the boundaries of the university and not just held within the academics, right? So we also have students that they're very important, but also that we can achieve that through partnerships. So partnerships is a central goal and it's at the core of community engagement and its three streams. Also underlying everything that we do in community engagement, and by we, I'm talking about also the researchers of the book and the community partners, is the fact that we are trying to, through our work, achieve social justice and also epistemic justice, right? By recognizing that, other members of the community, so the community members, they are knowers, they held knowledge, and we then, by that recognition, we have a moral imperative to then produce knowledge with them and co-produce knowledge with them. So they are part of the knowledge economy, not just, in snippets, as they usually are when you go do field work and then you collect the data and you leave, or through dissemination at the end when everything is done and you're sharing your results, but throughout that process. We have a horizontal knowledge economy. And also, and that's a very important point, because even, we do see it, there's a little bit of a buzz around, let's include, our other stakeholders and community partners in the knowledge economy, but there's usually a hierarchy within, the members of a project. And in community engagement, we're really breaking down those barriers, and we're really pushing the idea that, well, no, that's not the case. And so through volunteering, engaged research, and service learning, we are already really exposing our students to that reality, right? And challenging those assumptions that is embedded in academia as a whole in most cases. But then the step that follows is writing, right? So really including these community partners in the writing process. And that's, the book is a culmination of that. So speaking of the book as a method, is like, how did it start? So Charlie mentioned the symposium that we had in 2018. And then from that, we selected some papers of, well, this would be amazing to work with and have a book at the end. And understanding that moving from exposing our students, engaging with the community partners, in mutually beneficial partnerships, and then the recognition that, there are other knowers outside academia, then how do we do this write-up? So the book is not just a collection of case studies. This was a process. This was collectively built by the editors with the authors. So I would like to give an example. Kumala mentioned, chapter 3 from Nikki Hayes. She, at the time when she wrote the chapter, she was a principal at a no-fee paying schools in Makanda. And another example is chapter 4, which was led by Tandi Ngwana, and she was a master's student at the time. So these chapters, they kind of like illustrate the point that, we see like knowledge not just being within academics, but also like opening up, right? So daring to have community partners, not just as co-authors, but as, leading the work and writing, the chapters alone. And the process, it was a long process. I think we can all agree on that. There was a lot of back and forth, a lot of feedback, a lot of writing and rewriting. And I know for the authors, it was a painful and long process, but it was an important process. And that's why the book is what it is, because you can really see the different voices and in the different contributions coming through, because that uniqueness that everyone has and the critical contributions, right, that no one else could make. And then what we did is just allow that to flourish. Yeah, I think another important point is that, who is our research for? So we don't want the book to be just for, academics. This book is above and most of all for our community members, and we also want very much the students to engage with that. So again, just to push the boundaries of how knowledge is produced, who it's produced by, and how do you go about changing the knowledge economy in a meaningful way. Now I'm going to hand over to Craig, who will talk about the nexus between social innovation and higher education institutions. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to try and link in what Charlie said, what Joya said, and then draw into this broad idea of social innovation. But I'd like to speak on this at a very practical level. I think, Charlie's told us how this started, and Joya's told us what it's for, or who it's for. I'd like to tell you what it's about. And someone a while back asked me what this book is about, and I thought about it for a second and said, everything. And I kind of think that's almost true, we cover a huge amount of ground in this book. And I'd like to just kind of try and explain to you what this thing is actually about. And the best place to start is probably where Charlie picked up there, on this idea of the apartheids of knowledge. The apartheids of knowledge does signify a kind of power imbalance, and all the social and epistemic prejudices and injustices that go along with it. It does challenge these hierarchies. But if we look at the title, we can see in that word apartheid another kind of reading. We can see it in terms of the apartness and the separation of knowledge that we find. And I think that this is probably most visible in the idea of community engagement, which is, of course, where this whole project started, where the university establishes this engagement with a community that's defined as something outside of it. That we are, as a university, are a different community to the one that we're engaging in. So community engagement is the university going out to that other community. And this, of course, is something that many people have pointed out before, and a lot of people have made great strides in changing the situation. But that's where community engagement would have initially come from, that community engagement wouldn't have needed to exist if there hadn't been an ivory tower to break down in the first place. I hope that makes sense. So that's a core separation between community and university. And these separations are present on so many levels within the university as well. operational level, in the operational logics of university, we've got this idealized community of scholars acting in a sort of autonomous way, and then we've got the institution, the corporate institution, the bureaucracy, the legal person of the university. And of course, you see it on the disciplinary level as well, where we've got disciplines, sub-disciplines, genres, approaches, and it starts to look like the university that has been built is 10,000 little ivory towers. Also separated on different positions where we declared as a student or as a teacher or as a manager administrator, and these impact on the roles that we take, where we have teaching and research as these two very separate things. And each is so distinct that it's got its own division of the university. And I think in our university, it's got its own deputy vice chancellor for teaching and for research. And then you have community engagement, which comes in as the sort of third leg of the stool of teaching and research, where it's added separately. So when we say this, challenging the apartheids of knowledge, we're not only talking about the power imbalances, we're talking about these separations that come with that as well. Yeah. And our argument in here is that these separations and the power imbalances that come with them can, at least in part, be challenged through a commitment to this broad concept of social innovation. And it's kind of strange to deal with such a broad concept, because in an academic environment, we almost crave precision and exactitude. Such a broad kind of notion might seem like a bad thing. But what social innovation provides us with is a broad principle, a versatile principle, that we can start thinking about our position. So social innovation itself is about developing and implementing these new sort of innovative solutions to social problems, whatever they may be. Yeah? And in the case of universities, social innovation work is, in its broadest sense, about us applying our knowledge and our training to address the problems that we face in society. So it's about us essentially being of use, of direct use to solving these social issues that are around us. But then how would social innovation challenge these so-called apartheids of knowledge? Well, I think if we're really committed to social innovation as an idea and as a principle of direct use to society in solving problems, then we require an honest engagement with that society. We can't just observe from an ivory tower. We can't just go in as the expert. So it kind of asks something different of us. We can't step out into this external community, this other world, and then retreat back. And it forces us to break that idea of society being the problem and then the university being the solution. So this commitment to social innovation is actually a commitment to knowing the problem, finding the solutions, applying the solutions. And that isn't an interloper position. So in the course of carrying out this work directed at social innovation, we're forced to kind of break down those separations between the university and the community. And in the practice of it, we're forced to start seeing the university and the community as one and the same thing. And with that separation broken, to bring it back to community engagement, you can see that the task of community engagement would completely change when that division between university and outside university is broken down. Community engagement starts to become more diffused across all of our activities. It's no longer in a position of looking out. It ceases to be this third leg alongside teaching and research, but becomes incorporated into both of them. And if we take the task seriously, as I think certainly all of us in community engagement have done, then it starts to break down the border between teaching and research as well, with each starting to feed into the other. They become far less distinct. Now, what am I going on about here? That is what the book is about. If you think about what this book is actually about, it's about the ways in which some of us have tried successfully and unsuccessfully to break through these different towers, to break the division between what's outside the university and what's inside the university, and break down these disciplinary barriers managerial barriers, different roles that we are expected to fulfill as academics. And we've compiled this collection as a sort of a collection of experiments almost that we've published together as an invitation to others to sort of make their own foray into attacking the wall of the ivory tower, in a sense. Joe, I'm not sure of the exact term he used, but he's daring to have partners here. And I think that we can use daring in a different sense there. We're daring everyone else to do the same in writing the book. And that's what the book is about. And I'm pretty sure I've already gone over time, so I'll pass back.
I was just reminding Craig about the time limitations. Thanks to the co-editors for really a rounded discussion on the book, both in terms of its inception, its contributions to method, and how those methods are then applied in terms of sort of responding to immediate socio-political questions, as well as to the broader academic pursuits within our various disciplines. Now I'm going to move on to some of the contributors to the volume who will be sharing with us some of their thinking around their contributions to the book, as well as what motivated their particular chapters. I've got an order of 4 individuals who will be sharing with us: Dr. Ashley Westaway, Jonathan Davey, Nikki Hayes, and Claire McCann. Dr. Westaway, I wonder if you want to take it away. Ashley?
Thanks, Izeka. Thanks for the invitation. And maybe an initial comment that I'd like to make is to, just in reference to what Charlie started off with, the background to the book, just to thank the editors for what Craig termed that kind of daring approach, because it basically meant that people like myself from outside the academy get an opportunity to publish, not just to publish, but to participate in symposiums, to interact with a wide range of people, to exchange ideas. And yeah, from my perspective, I think it's appropriate for me just to say thank you and to commend your daring, and kind of also acknowledge that I'm a beneficiary of that daring, and I'm very grateful for that. And just to kind of make that point a little bit clearer in relation to the chapter, I've been involved. The chapter that I've contributed is really a kind of I suppose a statement of a sociological statement of public schooling in South Africa. I've been working in the sector now for 10 years. And over the course of this period, I've been trying to think intelligently, think critically, think effectively in terms of the difficulties that we face in terms of trying to transform public education in South Africa. And the thoughts that are communicated in my chapter really represent, I think, the most important statement that at the moment and over the last decade I'm able to make in that regard at this particular point in time. So for me to have the opportunity to publish these ideas is really, really important, because it kind of has given me a platform to get that thinking out there. Yeah, so I don't want to take too much time. I know that a lot has been said and a lot more will be said, but I just want to kind of maybe make a few comments about the chapter in relation to what's been spoken about. I'm not quite sure if it relates exactly to the notion of apartheids of knowledge, but I think there are some interesting suggestions there. So the one is that the hegemony or the consent or the dominant voice in relation to South African schooling is what I term a kind of a dysfunctionality approach, which is basically trying to understand schools in relation to what they do not do, trying to understand schools in relation to why they are failing. This is really kind of pervasive and remains pervasive today. And so we get to a situation where the reasons for the failure of schools to deliver quality education are really fairly well understood, and yet nothing changes. And this I found kind of particularly frustrating as I spent more time in the sector. So essentially what the chapter outlines is a contrast to the dysfunctionality thesis, which is essentially a functionality thesis, which is basically then trying to say, what is it that schools in South Africa are doing successfully in order to understand why the status quo is sustained? And so it's basically taking a broad kind of Foucauldian position in terms of saying, just like we can't understand power just as a repressive kind of force, we have to understand power in terms of its generative and productive capacity. Similarly, if we want to understand the serious problems in South African schools, we have to understand what they are doing and therefore why they are sustained as such. And basically the argument is that what they are doing is they are serving as very effective sites for the dispensing of patronage and welfare, which are kind of the dominant techniques of power that characterize the post-apartheid South Africa. They deliver patronage through the payment of salaries. They deliver welfare through food feeding schemes. In fact, most recently, this rolling out of teacher assistants on these 5-month contracts can equally be understood as a rolling out of welfare in the system. So they are dispensing large amounts of state patronage and state welfare very effectively, and that is basically why the system is being sustained. And the key thing, of course, to understand is that the fact that they do those things very, very well means that they cannot structurally deliver quality education for the children of this country. So, you know, it's a very, very kind of big idea. It's a very innovative idea in the context of the kind of hegemony of thinking in relation to the problem. And hopefully, and I'm pretty confident the fact that it's now published is going to kind of provoke a lot of debate and a lot of discussion in that regard. And hopefully, once that plays out, there's going to be a lot more innovation also in terms of trying to resist that hegemony. And that's what the last section of the chapter does by drawing on the ideas of Grumsky and particularly looking at the notion of war of position as a kind of possible strategic, intellectual kind of insight into trying to break down this hegemony that is so bad for the children of the country. So I think I'll stop there and again just end by thanking the editors and all of the stakeholders, the leadership. I see, you know, Di Hornby is here, but all of the leadership around this process which has enabled this book to be published. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ashley. Thanks for that contribution. And we're going to move swiftly to Jonathan Davey, who's a lecturer in the Human Kinetics and Ergonomics Department at Rhodes University and author of Chapter 12. I'll remind colleagues of 5 minutes, please, for each presentation so that we can afford some time for questions near the end. Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you, Kumalo, and good afternoon to everybody. And thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'd firstly just like to say to Joe, to Charlie, and to Craig, congratulations on the publication of this exceptional and interesting, diverse, and novel work that has certainly provided key insights and strategies to those operating the academy around how they might be or go about shifting their teaching and learning and research activities towards being more responsive and suited to preparing students to tackle the many complex challenges that universities need and should be weighing in on. But I did like your introduction very much in the sense that it provides an important cautionary note around how universities need and should weigh in on issues facing society, emphasizing the importance of equal participation, responsive and sensitive teaching and research activities, and the need for more value-laden and mutually beneficial interactions with and for communities. The publication of this book is timeless, given the deeply negative impacts that the pandemic has had on our communities, on our country, and across the world, especially in groups who are already marginalized. It is indeed a privilege for us to be part of this book, and it's our sincere thanks to you all for the opportunity to contribute to it. In our chapter of this book, it captures our reflections on interactions with an NGO based at Warwick Junction in Durban, Socia Etafuleni, and a more global network, Women in Informal Economies, Globalizing and Organizing, or WeGo, both of whom work alongside and advocate for workers in the informal economy in South Africa, but more broadly across the globe. Warwick Junction, which was the site of the research in which we based the book chapter on, is a central transport node in the heart of Durban, where on a daily basis, nearly 500,000 people move through. In response to this, and to accommodate for the various needs of these commuters, there are nearly 8,000 informal traders operating in this space, along the streets and the bridges and the buildings that surround the station, and selling just about anything that anyone could need. The beauty about this space is its vibrancy, its colors, the smells and the sights, the hustle and the bustle of Durban on the move. And it is what some have argued should be what an African city should look like, the meshing of formal and informal economies working together. At face value, it appears chaotic and random, but seeing this space through the eyes of AET, Socia Etafuleni, and those who work there, there is clear purpose behind everything that one sees, from what is sold to where it is sold from, the times that things are sold, and the different things that are sold, and the connectedness between the different sectors that make up the markets of Warwick. Innovation is everywhere, born out of the necessity to overcome the many challenges that the traders face, and as a discipline that focuses on trying to understand the barriers to safe and effective work. As ergonomists, the market offers an eye-opening experience to different ways in which work happens, where it happens, but more importantly, the challenges that many in that space face on a daily basis. Our experiences of Warwick Junction alongside AET and the traders were powerfully transformational for many reasons which we reflect on in the chapter, but allow me to share one or two with you. As a student myself, much of my education and training focused on preparing me for work in formal settings, where employees have some form of social protection, occupational health and safety programs, the equipment that they need to do the work, and perhaps even a place to do the work. Work in the informal economy, and not in all cases, often has very little of these facets of formal work. And often, wage or self-employed workers have to work in environments that present a variety of challenges to their health and well-being. And they have to work hours that take them away from important restorative activities like sleep, while also having to perform tasks that are physically taxing, which, if they get injured during, leave little to no choice to carry on doing. They often have to work in spaces where city officials and the police and the public perceive them as nuisance for no other reason than they are trading in public, and often there are no amenities to support them. Seeing and hearing, smelling and feeling this space has without doubt opened our eyes to the realities of the work of many South Africans and Africans. Importantly, these experiences captured in this chapter have fundamentally shaped the way in which we teach and do research. It has emphasized the importance of showing and engaging our graduates on these spaces with the intention of making them more aware about the difficult and sometimes precarious ways in which informal traders have to work in these spaces. Now more than ever, we need to be mindful of the work in the informal economy, given that the massive impact of COVID-19 has had on the growth of this sector, but also on the various lockdown restrictions and how they have made informal economy work near impossible, which unfortunately affects the vast network of dependence on these traders. Working with Socia Etafuleni and the organizations that are already embedded in this setting has forever shaped our views of what it means to be participatory, to see, to acknowledge, and to legitimize the experiences of all workers, not just those in formal spaces. It lends new meaning to innovation, which doesn't necessarily have to mean the development and integration of the latest technology or artificial intelligence, but rather the design of a simple upcycled cart to transport water, designed to look unattractive and worn out so that the police do not think that it's been stolen. The experience lends new meaning to what it means to be resilient. It is not about bouncing back from acute challenges and tragedy, but rather finding solutions and workarounds to daily systemic injustices. It has sadly also highlighted the continued subjugation of women who tend to occupy the lowest paying jobs while bearing the additional burden of unpaid care work at home. To share this with our students, and part of a joint course that I teach with my colleague Andrew Todd, involves taking students around our own town of Makanda to show them the different forms of work and life, depending on where the workers live in the East or the West. In doing so, we show the students the spaces, the activities of the people, and the work that some of them have not seen or would not have chosen to see. This, we feel, is key to prepare them for the real South Africa that they will eventually work in when they leave the university. To Charlie and to Joe and to our fellow contributors, this book for us is validation. It is validation for us to continue to embed community engagement in our teaching and learning and research activities, in spite of the slow, messy, frustrating, and sometimes very sad experiences that arise from working with communities. It does indeed provide a strong argument of why and how the Academy needs to become more socially responsive at a time when our town and our country needs it most. So Khumalo, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to have shared some thoughts on this call today.
Thank you for that, Jonathan. And the next speaker that I have on my proceeding of speakers is Nikki Hayes, who is based at the Center for Social Development and is the author of Chapter 3, The Problem of Power, the Practical Challenges of Power Dynamics and Power Distance and Community Engagement. I wonder if Nicola Hayes is with us this afternoon.
She has provided us with a pre-recorded video. She's not able to join us, and I'm going to share that video with everyone now.
Thank you, Charlie.
So I'm not sure if I'm more excited or my mother is more excited that I'm actually published in a real book. I certainly know my mother's sent off photographs of the cover to many, many people to tell them how absolutely brilliant her daughter is. And so, much as I laugh about it, really it is something really special for me. At the time that this was written, I was a principal and wouldn't have considered myself to be somebody who might be included in this kind of an academic book. And what's really been quite empowering for me is because the process took quite a while, as these things do. By the time I was asked to re-edit something about a year after I'd written it, I looked back at what I'd written and I was like, oh, that's not too bad. So I'm really grateful for the experience, and also ironically really finding it so other parts of the book so useful in my current work, in particular the chapter on the wordless storybooks. We're busy with that at the moment at the CSD. So lastly, just really enjoying returning to that conference and some of the other speakers, just picking up the things that were such fun to listen to at the time and being able to go into them in more depth. So what an all-round amazing experience. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Thank you for sharing that, Charlie. We move swiftly along and we are managing to keep our time. To Claire McAnn, a master's candidate in economics at Rhodes University. I wonder if Claire is with us.
Claire? I also have a video from Claire. She is busy preparing to go off on her new scholarship, so I'm going to share her video now.
Thank you, Charlie.
Super.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Claire. I'm a Masters of Economics student here at Rhodes University. And this year, I've had the absolute fortune to work part-time with the Rhodes University Community Engagement Division. I am absolutely thrilled to be with you here today, at least virtually, to talk about this incredible book, Challenging the Apartheids of Knowledge in Higher Education Through Social Innovation. For me, this is a book that absolutely every student should read, especially those who are beginning to embark on or are currently in the middle of their postgraduate journey, who are beginning to tackle independent research of their own. But I think it's also important for any student who's interested in the transformation of higher education, and universities in particular, with respect to enhancing physical and epistemological access. This book for me is daring. It interrogates the roles universities have played in perpetuating inequality and dares to reimagine an alternative future where our knowledge production and knowledge dissemination is not narrow and extractive, but based on collaboration where students, academics, and community partners can come together in mutually beneficial relationships as we develop social innovations and as we construct and disseminate knowledge together. For me, what I absolutely loved about the book was the diversity of perspectives and the different voices I saw throughout the chapters. For me, it was so wonderful to see the voices of students that I recognized on a postgraduate journey like my own, and it showed me the importance of young voices in challenging the apartheids of knowledge. I also loved to hear about the experiences of community partners, some I recognized. I loved Dr. Ashley Westaway's account, which shed light on the developmental and social innovations that the Gadra Education NGO in Makanda was developing alongside our local public schools. And I also love to hear about the experience of Nicola Hayes, a local high school principal, as she talked about negotiating mutually beneficial and reciprocal community engagement relationships. It was also wonderful to hear from the voices of academics and their own journeys in this experience. For me, all of these stories gave me greater insight into my own Makanda context, but I found that other chapters kind of took me beyond that. They took me to Diepsloot and the Kruger National Park, just to name a few. And what that showed for me was the need to be locally responsive. All of these stories were context-bound and spoke directly to their own local contexts. But it also spoke of national responsiveness and a global orientation as we tackle unequal knowledge dissemination and unequal knowledge production worldwide. Another thing that I thought was so insightful was the way in which this book framed community engagement. We often have the two pillars of teaching and learning and then research as entirely separate things, and sometimes we have community engagement on its own as kind of a separate thing added on at the end. But what this book did was it interrogated that. It showed how important community engagement was if we wanted to decolonize teaching and learning, and if we wanted to decolonize research, and ultimately if we wanted to contribute not just to a knowledge economy, but to a knowledge democracy. This book envisioned community engagement not as a separate pillar, but deeply intertwined and deeply embedded in the other two pillars, so that we can contribute to a broader and more substantive body of knowledge. Another thing that I absolutely loved was the fact that you became so immersed in the stories, and they provided a space for deep interrogation and deep self-reflection as you followed other people along their journeys. They showed how important it is to highlight the voices of those contributing to change and how we can all play a role in this process. So I'm going to end off not with my own words, but with the words of the editors, because I think they frame it in the best possible light. So here is my own copy of the book, and I have to admit it's very dog-eared, but I hope that you will see that as a compliment, not an insult, because on my bookshelf you can tell the books I enjoy by how rough they look. So the pristine books I probably haven't read or I gave up reading. This book looks like it's been around the block. It's traveled with me to Cape Town, to Port Alfred, to Joburg, to Namibia. It's seen the world. And I just want to paraphrase and also quote directly at the same time the words of the editors in the introduction. They say, with this book, we can alter the way in which knowledge is produced, assist in breaking the apartheids of knowledge, and move towards the realization of a higher education sector which works directly for the betterment of society, and consequently acts as a positive and effective force in bringing about social justice. When we directly interrogate the role universities have played and imagine a different future, we can orientate ourselves towards social justice and the public good, which is what universities in South Africa should be striving towards. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that share, Charlie. And finally, we move on to Di. Di Hornby is the Director of Rhodes University's Community Engagement Office. Di, take it away.
Thank you, Kamala. I'm going to keep it short to allow for a few questions. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate the 3 editors and all the authors who contributed to this book, aptly titled Challenging the Apartheids of Knowledge in Higher Education Through Social Innovation, and arguing for the centralization of community engagement. The book is both timely and hugely relevant, not only for the South African context, but also for internationally. So for centuries, the majority world has experienced the hegemony of Eurocentric knowledge and dominance of the positivist paradigm. And throughout the world, and specifically in the colonized world, which includes South Africa, Eurocentric epistemology and positivism embedded themselves as the foundation of higher education through the functions of teaching, research, respectively. So while this foundation is still holding strong in the 21st century, it is encouraging to note that the attempts to dismantle this foundation by a few scholars and individuals of the South is slowly gaining momentum in the 21st century. The movement for inclusion of knowledge democracy in higher education institutions through community engagement is gaining traction, and we've heard some wonderful input from community partners and students today. Engagement in the higher education arena in South Africa opens up the space to address the epistemic justice that emanates from universities from a number of perspectives. And the 3 that are identified in this book are within the academy, between academia and communities, and between the 3 core functions of the university, which are teaching, research, and community engagement. So our sense is that the resistance to community engagement over the years is diminishing, albeit slowly. While community engagement is not yet integrated and institutionalized in universities, I believe that a book such as this one can contribute towards the institutionalization of CE, because it raises awareness and educates in 3 ways: on the developmental role and public good purpose of universities, on universities' social responsibility to both students and communities, and most importantly, I think, on the fact that academics have to be open to learning, and so does the university as an institution. And I'll stop there, Kamala, and allow for some questions.
Thank you for that framing, Di. And I think in most instances, what you're suggesting is, I think, a really big thrust that the reader encounters in the book, both in terms of the contributions, as well as the overarching framework of the book, which is the centrality of community engagement, as we encounter it in terms of the historical ambitions of how the sector was envisioned to function, as well as, of course, the current work that is happening within community engagement divisions and offices across the country within universities. But of course, the challenge that we encounter is that there is this ambition, this lofty goal that is not necessarily taken up across universities and across disciplines, even within institutions. So you have certain individuals who will be driving that kind of work within certain faculties, maybe one individual in one faculty, in one department, but it doesn't necessarily inform the bedrock of disciplinary knowledge and its constitutions within our university and knowledge production more generally. In any case, let me shut up. I'll take 2 questions prior to closing up the session, but I do think that in the general sense, what we find with the book is really sort of this kind of thrust to have us thinking very differently about what community engagement means and engaging community engagement within our various disciplinary foci and disciplinary situations, if one can call it that. I wonder if there are any questions in the chat box. Otherwise, I will take raised hands. I saw a hand earlier that was up. I wonder if that hand would still be interested in posing a question. Sue McKenna. Sorry for picking on you, Sue. I just saw your hand earlier. So, okay. Sue's not necessarily pulling through. Is there another question from the floor? Maybe if I could ask a question to get us, Michael.
Okay, hi, this is Esther Ramani. Michael and I are sharing his laptop. I had just started to type my question in, but now I will speak it. So what I certainly feel that this book is moving us in the right direction towards destabilizing university, so-called university knowledge. But what I do see in the book is that several of the authors are actually university people, in the sense that they have academic training from universities. Several of them have their PhDs from universities and are now engaged in community work or work in the community. What would be a true disestablishment of positivistic university knowledge would be if you could have co-authors who are, say, informal traders or primary school teachers or people working in the healthcare sector like nurses who have knowledges which I'm not sure are actually found in the book. So how would the editors and authors of this book respond to a question that though the book is moving in the right direction, it is not yet a repository of community knowledge?
Thank you for that question, Esther. I wonder if there's a second question, and then we can take both questions simultaneously. Is there a second question from the floor, colleagues? Okay, if there isn't a second question, Charlie, I saw you wanted to respond to Esther's remarks or question, yeah?
I did. So firstly, hi, Esther. Nice to hear your voice after a very long time. And thank you for raising what you've raised. I think you're spot on with what you've raised and saying that what we're doing is a step towards that destabilization, a step towards our ultimate goal. And that is what we have to offer at this point. I think from my side, it's very difficult to get to the end of the road if you don't take the first steps on that road. And I think that's what I was trying to highlight in my opening statement, was some of the first steps that led to this bigger step. And hopefully this step is the provocation to people who are working inside the publishing industry, who are a major barrier to that goal of having a true community repository, to having community partners really represented in the way that you're talking about inside of an academic book rather than a different kind of nonfiction book, but an academic publication. And so that's where we'd like to go there. And hopefully this is a step in that direction. I know I'm not answering your question of how we get there, but I suppose the answer is this is how we get there, is the step, and the next step is moving forward. And certainly from my own perspective, I would really like my next publications coming out to be ones that move further along this road. But I'll hand over to some of the other editors and co-authors who may have more to say. But thank you for raising this. It's aspirational for all of us.
And then just before I invite the other two colleagues to make a contribution, there is a question by Anthea Adams. Is there a link to order copies of the book? And secondarily, I would like to pose a question to the editors as a way of wrapping up. I wonder, and this is a question that I'm just sitting with as a decolonial thinker, I wonder whether or not the process of doing community engaged research or research from the margins or grassroots research allows us, in terms of a decolonial question, in terms of how I would pose it, does the process of undertaking decolonial thinking or conducting decolonial research give us new philosophical questions or aids us in responding to Western philosophical questions? The question for community engagement would be, does the methodology change? Does the orientation of the intellectual change? Do we answer, are we still using extractivist research methodologies, or are we changing the gaze completely towards those whose lives we are writing about and documenting in our research process? If the answer to the question is it doesn't, either it doesn't give us new philosophical problems, or we don't change the research methodology in terms of community engagement, should we be upset by that? Or should we just be like, well, at least we're still exploring? So those are the two questions. The first one from Anthea Adams about a link, and the second one being this question around whether or not this particular orientation gives us new questions and new methods. And if it doesn't, should we be unhappy with that? I know it's a very big question, colleagues, and apologies for putting you on the spot. Charlie, I see you want to tackle this one. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I'll just jump in, but I'd love for Craig and Joe to jump in as well. I think, I mean, in answer to your question, the point of the book is to say change the methods here, and everything about the book is a showcasing of how we change the methods. And so it's a move away from this extractive research. It's a move away from saying we do everything that you just said. Actually, is a move away from research about people. Our research about people. I could just deconstruct the whole thing that you've just said and show why each part of it is the antithesis of the method proposed in the book. So I'd say, you know, that's what it's about. But also, I think, interestingly, what the book shows is that through this change in method, new questions automatically arise, and that's precisely what's interesting. But I'll stop there because I see Craig has unmuted himself, and I'd love to know what he's going to say.
Esther, great to hear your voice again. And you are exactly right. There are one or two other sorts of approaches coming out over the last few years. One that stands out of my mind is a collection on life in Johannesburg by Wits University Press that was called, I think, I Want to Go Home Forever, I think was the title of the book. And that would be a good sort of direction to take it in. But the fact that you're asking these questions about this book is exactly why we published this book. That, like I said, when I was telling you what the book is about earlier, or trying to anyway, I'm still not sure whether I succeeded in that, this is a lot of experimentation. And I think that comes back to what Kumalo was saying, or the question that Kumalo posed, where we're talking about, are we moving towards a truly sort of decolonized method or decolonized way of thinking here? And I'm not sure we've properly articulated what a truly decolonized system would be. We can work with decolonial theory, but we're always pushing it forward and moving in different directions. To say that we've properly decolonized or found a way of decolonizing deeply colonial institutions, not just in the university, but of governance in general, is pushing it a bit far, I think. So should we be disappointed that we haven't reached there? No, not at all. And in a lot of ways, it's a bit like cooking. You know, we're playing with the recipe here. And in the end, you got to eat it and see what happens. And I think that's the process that we're going down here. And this book was, in a sense, an academic recipe book to see where we're going. And from here, we will tweak it and work it, and we invite everyone else to do the same thing. So, Esther, you're absolutely right. We haven't gone to where we want to go. And Pedro has just said that he will try eating the book. I don't doubt that, Pedro. But we are in a process of experimentation. And I think sometimes we have to be satisfied with the experiment itself and just seeing what comes out, rather than finding a definitive conclusion at the end of each experiment.
I know we are actually past our time, but I just wanted to reiterate what Charlie said. I think it's a process. It could have gone better, absolutely. It could also have gone a lot worse. So it's a process of trying to break through these barriers and push the boundary, right, of the knowledge economy, actually of the knowledge economy, of the knowledge democracy. But I do think the book does have community knowledge, maybe not in all chapters, but I think it does have the knowledge from community partners and from community members, and something that was done with the community and not for them on an extractive point. So it is also, when we're talking about engaged research, and Renee was, I see Renee was present here, it is a process, right, to actually achieve community-based participatory research. You go through all these stages, and I think that's what we're doing here, trying to get there. And I completely agree with Charlie. We are trying to, the book really shows that we need different methods, we use different methods, and that will lead to different questions that we don't necessarily yet know how we're going to answer. And the methods that we have right now, we don't know if they're going to help us answer those questions. But these are questions that need to be asked. And for us to get to these questions, we need to open up the floor to these different stakeholders. And I think that's what we're doing. So yeah, it's a process. We are just starting it. So it's a long way to go.
Well, hopefully not too long, Joe.
Hi, colleagues, I'm back. I got kicked out there for a second, but I am back. And at this point in time, I think it would be useful. I know that the conversation is really only just beginning in terms of questions and engagements around some of the key themes that come out of the book. And I really do think that the book, can sort of spur us in the right direction because of a lot of the themes that are covered in the book. Which really center individuals who have been located at the margins for a very long time. And the only thing that I am sort of curious about is to say, how do we unlock the potential of knowledge of those who have been marginalized in the process of knowledge production in more effective ways, such that we can of knowledge production in meaningful ways. I think my system might be, I don't know, because everybody's frozen. Okay, I'm back. All right, sorry about that. But I think thank you to the editors as well as to the contributors for such an amazing piece of work that I think will be informing a lot of the work that the rest of us are doing, whether we're working in social justice, whether we're working in socially responsive pedagogies, whether we're working in decoloniality, or in whatever other discipline, in fact, that folks are situated in. So I think that this work is going to be one that will be cited quite a lot and will be a rich toolkit for us to draw from with our research projects as we go along. To everybody who came out this afternoon to join us on a Thursday afternoon, which feels like a Friday, thank you very much for giving us your time. We know we've just gone a bit over time and we do apologize for that, but I think it really was just the richness of the conversation that sort of allowed things to kind of stretch just a bit further. To the organizers, Charmaine Avery and her amazing team who always do incredible work, thank you so much for pulling everybody together. Thank you to the editors, thank you to the contributors, and I'm certain that there are some contributors who are part of the conversation today, but who are not necessarily able to contribute. For those who will be watching this at a later date, I believe you will find it just as insightful and as meaningful as those of us who were present here today. Today and the work that's being done by the Community Engagement Office at Rhodes University, you guys are doing stellar work. And this is really, really impressive. And I think a lot of institutions across the country will have a lot to learn from Rhodes University and what you folks are doing that side. So thank you for providing the space for such scholarship to find space and to breathe and to become alive. Colleagues, thank you very much and have a lovely afternoon. And yes, I'm certain we will see each other again soon because of this virtual world that we're doing nowadays. So thank you, everybody, and take care. Have a lovely afternoon. Cheers.
Thank you, Kumalo.